My name is Shalhevet Schwartz, and this is Gefet Yomi, a joint project of Hadran and Yeshivat Drisha. We've now been in Masechet Avodah Zarah for quite a while, and most of the conversations or most of the sugyot that we're dealing with are not necessarily um, the most practicable, right? Halakhic sugyot when it comes to our own day-to-day lives. Um, the questions about right who in the contemporary world or what kind of religion in our contemporary world is considered to be avodah zarah are complex, but we don't necessarily encounter avodah zarah in our everyday lives, in our day-to-day lives nowadays. But what we'll be exploring today is a sugya that actually does really have a lot of practical ramifications for um, our our day-to-day lives, which is the prohibition of creation of creation of a tzurat Adam, of the likeness of man, um, which really raises interesting questions about contemporary portraiture, photography, sculpture, etc. What we're going to see today in this is a sugya exploring right the nature of that prohibition, the scope of that prohibition, and we'll look at how some modern poskim address contemporary questions around photography, around dolls, and more. So let's get started. We're on Daf Mem Gimel. We're going to begin with the Mishnah, right? That deals with finding right hamutze kelim v'aleihem tzurat chama, tzurat levana, tzurat darkon, yolichem liyam hamelach. Right, someone who finds a vessel that is right that has imprinted on it figures of the sun, the moon, or some kind of dragon, right, has to take them to Yam HaMelech, meaning that they are asurim b'hana'ah, as a potential concern of, or as a concern of avodah zarah. And the sugya, as you all know, if those who have learned it and are following along, deals right, asks a number of questions about right, is it specifically these three things? Is it other images? And a diuk, and right, the question of motzeh versus oseh, is it someone who finds it versus or is the problem to make it? And within that diyun, we get Abaye. Abaye who comes along and says, Lo asura Torah ela bidmut arba panim bahadehadade, that the Torah only prohibited a figure that has right four faces together. Right? What is this four-faced figure that he's referring to? So Rashi's going to tell us in a moment. Uh, but let's just continue from there. Right, Elame Ata, the Gemara asks, Partsuf Adam L'chudei Tishrei, what right, is it really the case that um if according to Abai only this four-faced figure, and we'll see as Rash is going to explain that one of those faces is a human face, right? If only the four-faced figure is asur, does that mean that a human face by itself would be mutar? That can't be. Adam, right? But we have a writer that says that actually, right, faces are permitted um to create, but a human face is not. So in answer to that question, Rav Yehuda Bereder Rav Yehoshua comes along and says, right, Amar Rav Yehuda Bereder Rav Yehoshua, mi Pirkei Rav Yehoshua Shmieli, right? I was in Rav Yehoshua's shir, and he taught that lo ta'asun iti. He made a drasha on the pasuk of lo ta'asun iti, right, which is the pasuk of a prohibition of avodah zarah, lo ta'asun iti Elohei chesef Elohei zahav, right? Don't create. Right, and the drasha there is going to be the kriyuch div, right? Et means right with me, but they're reading it to be ot, right? Chaser avav lo ta'asun ot aval shar shamashin shari, right? That this drasha comes to say that one may not create me or the likeness of me, but other shamashim, other attendants or other kinds of figures are permitted. So there's a prohibition to create a partsuf adam, but other kinds of figures or pictures are non-human of non-human creatures are permitted. So that's the Gemara. Rashi is going to tell us what this arba'a panim is referring to. So Rashi on arba'a panim, which is right what Abaye said was prohibited, only this four-faced figure. He says that right. He points us to the Maaseh HaMerkava in Yechazkel, when Yechazkel sees a vision of this four-faced figure, arba'a panim pnei shor v'adam v'aryeh v'nesher l'chaya achat. Right, that Yechazkel sees this four-faced figure that right in this moment of kind of massive divine revelation, right? That divine revelation comes in part in the form of this four-faced figure that has an ox, a human, a lion, and an eagle. Right, Dugmat Chayot HaKodesh, right, and what Rashi says is these are right. These are figures of the Chayot HaKodesh. These are the kind of um, animals that are right attending to God on high. Dichtiv iti hashruyot etzli, right? That what is when God says lo tasun iti, right? Don't make images of the things that are with me, the things that are shuruyot etzli that dwell beside me, right? Those are the attending or kind of ministering um, animals, um, right? These kind of divine creatures. So what Rashi's saying that Abaye is referring to this kind of four-faced figure and the problem there is that it sort of points us to um, the images of the creatures that are on high, right? The psukim, right, of this chariot narrative of Maseh Merkava and Yechezkel. So one of the faces of the Shekhinah is described as a human face, and the problem of the human face in particular is that it harkens to this to these creatures that are on high, and that's why you're forbidden to make a likeness of the human face. And but the Ritva, right, when he the Ritva in his explanation of this lo ta'asuniti drasha, right, he's going to give us a slightly different um, he's going to point us in a slightly different direction as to why it is that the human face that it would be asur to create an image of the human face. Perush kederach she'amar hakatuv b'meshalav ha'adam b'tselem Elohim asauta. Right, that the Torah says, obviously, on some level, metaphorically about the creation of humanity, that God was created b'tselem Elohim, right? God was created in the image of God. What does that mean? That man was created in the image of God, that there is something of the divine in us, and therefore our figure or our kind of physical appearance, right, has in it something, right, something of the divine. Right, v'afal pishu mashal, right, even though that is sort of metaphorical, God doesn't actually look like a human. Chasha katuv la'asiyato mipnei kavod shel mala, right? God is or the Torah is concerned that we not create a human figure as a matter of kavod or right, a matter of dignity or honor for God, who we are supposed to be created in likeness of or in the image of. Right, there are a lot of halachot, or there are a few halachot at least that are based on this idea of tzelem Elohim. For example, the prohibition of leaving bodies out in public overnight without burial, um, is about the concern, right, or hanging, is the prohibition of leaving bodies hanging overnight is um, a right, is a concern that right, it's kilat Elohim talui, right, that it is a sort of degradation of God, because on some level the human form and the human body um, represents something of the divine. So the human figure is described as right in the creation story as Tzelem Elohim, and therefore it's forbidden to create its likeness. That's the Ritva's perspective. Now we're going to spend much of the rest of our time exploring this a Tosafot, right, on this sugya, who makes a couple of different points um, about this prohibition, and eventually kind of takes us in the direction of the question that's going to have a lot more contemporary relevance. So Tosafot starts with the question: Tema, right? Why is it that we need a separate prohibition for the heavenly attendants if we already know that a human face is prohibited? And Tosfot's answer is going to be right? The fact that it's prohibited to make a human face, right? We still need a separate prohibition to create an angel, for example, because angels, according to Tosfot, don't look like humans. There's actually something unique about humanity, and the figures, right? Even the more human-like figures on high aren't actually human-like. Dehachanami Amrin Chagiga, right? He quotes a Gemara in Chagiga that says the leka uref, that angels or the ministering angels don't have a back of their neck the way that humans do. So why is it that we need a separate prohibition for the heavenly attendants, as Tosfot? Because the heavenly attendants do not look like humans. Tosfot then asks another question, right? V'im tomar kevan de parsuf adam lechudei asur, amai itzrich le'asur demut arba'a panim bahadeh. But right, bahadadeh. Tepugle de iga demut hadam. Okay, now Tosfot's asking a question about right the sugya that we saw before and about the flow, right? What did Abaye say? Abaye said that the only problem was making this four-faced figure. And then right, another, right, Pirkei Rabbi Yeshua came along, right, this drasha of lo ta'asuniti that actually all images in the human likeness are forbidden. Tosafot saying, wait a second. What if this four-faced figure, if one of the faces is human, then that's kind of already includes a human face, which is already prohibited. So why do we need this prohibition of the four-faced figure? What's Abaye talking about? Tosfot offers two answers. Answer number one, v'yesh lomar lechayev af kshematza partzuf adam v'hishlim la'arba panim. Okay, so Tosfot's first answer is, well, there could be a situation where you could make this four-faced figure without having made the human figure. How? Let's say I find the human, right? I find a sculpture of a human, and then I kind of fill in the rest of the faces of the eagle and the ox and the lion, right? Then I created this four-faced figure without having created the human figure. So we still need this extra prohibition of the creation of the four-faced figure. Um, Even if the human is already prohibited, that's option number one. Option number two, inami lavor b'shnei lavin, that actually there are two different, right, two different lavin. One is lo ta'asuniti, and one is the separate prohibition of the four-faced figure that Abaye was talking about. And that maybe you'd be chayv twice. So why do we need a separate prohibition for a four-faced figure? One, to complete a figure that already started as human, and two is that one violates two separate prohibitions. Tosafos is now going to make a quick textual diuk, which is right. V'yesh l'dakdek mitaloka amar ella. Right, when in the introduction of this drasha of lo ta'asuniti, it doesn't that drasha did not include the word ella. And from that, Tosfot says, Shema mina de drasha de lo ta'asuniti atya aliba de kule alma. That this drasha of lo ta'asuniti is held by everyone, meaning everyone agrees, not just Abaye, but also, right, afilu aliba de rava de uki matnitin de la'el kula b'motzeh. Right, as we remember from the discussion of the Gemara, the machloket Abaye and Rava about whether or not the Mishnah is referring to one who finds or one who makes these kinds of these kinds of kelim or that right have images on them. Is the problem making them, or is the problem even holding on to them? And even according to Rava, who says mutzeh, right, it's still um, it would still be a problem to create a human figure. So this is that point there, that this textual diuk that right everyone agrees that it is asur to make a human figure. Now, Tosafot adds an important caveat. Right, first Tosafot says v'chein halakha. This is how we paskin. It's asur to make a human figure. V'chein halakha de partzuf adam asur lachtom v'asur lasot, not just to make it, but also to right stamp with it. If you have a kind of a seal and then you're pressing a seal into clay or something else, so that's also creating an impression of a human figure in some way, right? It's all asur halachically. Umihu, however, Shwartz says, utam tzurot adam shetzovim b'sidinim batzva'im v'chein berikma mutarim, right? And those the images of humans that you create, basically you color on onto sheets or onto like canvas would be a good an example of that for us nowadays, or berikma, or in some kind of textile. That's okay. Why? Kivan she'ein lahem partzuf shalem ela chatzi partzuf. So what does Tosafot say? He says, or how does he explain the difference between essentially sculpture and portraiture? Right, that when it comes to portraiture, right, it's not a partzuf shalem, it's not a full face, rather it's a chatzi partzuf. What does that mean? Right, it's a half face. The human figure, the human form exists in three dimensions. And what it is to create a human form that's only in two dimensions, you're not really seeing a human form, right? The halakhic prohibition is only to sculpt a human in three dimensions, or sculpt or stamp or something like that. And that's what Tosafot calls a partzuf shalem. The Rambam takes a similar view to that of Tosafot and maybe explains it in a slightly even more complete way, right? He here in his Hilchot Avodah Zarah asur la'asot tzurot l'noi ve'af al pi she'eina avodah kol chavim she'namar lo, right? It's even if there's no intention of it being avodah zarah, you still cannot make human faces, even if it's um, just for pleasure or for kind of to create for some kind of beauty, right? She'namar lo ta'asuniti. There's an iser, right? There's drasha on lo ta'asuniti. But I'm skipping to the yellow for a second. Lefikach, right? Lefikach ein mitzayrin lo ba'itz v'lo b'sid v'lo be'eben, right? You can't make something like this out of wood or plaster or stone. Surat hadam. But the problem is when it is a tzura buletet, when it is a three-dimensional figure. So there's, again, according to the Rambam, there is a halakhic prohibition only to sculpt a human in three dimensions, which he calls a tzura buletet. Now, we are going to as we're going to see here, there is a position that right, is halakhic on this more lenient position of the Rambam and Tosafot, and that is the position of the Ramban. Um, the Ramban holds that near Elefarish, Vilomar, it seems to be that deloshna bolet veloshna shokeh. There's no difference between bolet and shokeh, between three-dimensional and two-dimensional figures. V'chein bepartzuf adam, right? That for right that this is true also of partzuf adam of a human face. De lo ta'asun ktiv, right? It just says lo ta'asun, don't make it. V'lo pligrach mana ben boled lishokeh. Right? God did not explicitly make a distinction between two and three dimensions, so why should we make a distinction between two and three dimensions, right? According to the Ramban, there's a halakhic prohibition against both drawing or sculpting, drawing, painting, sculpting, weaving a human form. Um, and while he doesn't say so explicitly here, maybe there is something right, maybe there's something behind this machloket that might be a little bit deeper, right? Right, maybe we can read something into the reasoning of these two different positions, right? It might be right for the Rambam and for Tosafot, drawing a human form is prohibited. Sorry, is permitted, but sculpting is prohibited. And maybe part of that, what that's about, is that right? If what the Rambam and Tosafot are concerned about is a concern of avodah zarah, concern that you might come to worship these figures, right? People don't really worship paintings; they worship sculptures. And right, the chashash that the thing that you're creating might actually be avodah zarah, or might become avodah zarah, that you might treat it in that way, might really only apply to three-dimensional figures. On the other hand, the Ramban might be taking a position that, right, actually, right, harkening back to what the Ritva explained earlier, right, and we saw in the Ritva that um right that his understanding of this problem of Tzurat Adam is a problem of Tzelem Elohim, right? It's a problem of the fact that there's something sacred in the human form, that it's divine in a way, and perhaps we don't have the right or the power to go around kind of um creating something that is right has in it some kind of inherent sanctity, and maybe to try to duplicate it or replicate it is in and of itself kind of a an offense to the dignity of to the dignity and the divinity in the human form. So according to the Ramban, right, both drawing and sculpting humans is prohibited. And why is that? Because God prohibited creating this kind of a material image similar to God's own image, and that would apply to two-dimensional figures as well. Just to take a second to look at how we paskin in the Shulchan Aruch. So the Shulchan Aruch takes the kula of the Rambam and Tosafot. What does he say? He says Atzur l'tzei Atzur sheba mador shechina, right? Kigon arba panim b'hadei hadadeh v'chein tzurat tzrafim v'ofanim v'malachei hasharet. So there's a problem um, to create this four-faced figure, like Abaye said, or the Srafim and the Ofanim and the Malachim, right? And angelic creatures, V'chein Surat Adam Levado, and also all human figures. But what are we talking about? Bibu Letet, right? Specifically three dimensions. Aval b'shokat, keotam she'orgim bebeged u'mitzarim b'kotel b'samanim, right? If anything that you draw in a wall or weave, right, that kind of thing is fine. Portraiture is fine. Mutar la'asutam. The Taz, however, ta ends up taking the more machmir position of the Ramban. He ends up paskening the Ramban. Right? V'im kein tema la Shulchan Aruch shelo hivi dat Ramban. Right? Why didn't the Shulchan Aruch bring the Ramban's position? Well, inyan halacha, the Taz says, right? Vaday she'in lahakel klal neged divrei Ramban. You should not be mekil. You should be machmir like the Ramban. Right? V'hatur masikin v'chein aran. He brings other Rishonim who agree with it. The Taz holds like the Ramban that drawing or painting or textiles, other two-dimensional human figures are also prohibited. Um, Now we're going to shift for a minute. Skip a few hundred years to a contemporary question that came up with the introduction of the photograph, right, of the camera. All of a sudden, in the 19th century at some point, I believe, um, creating or generating, replicating the human form became a whole lot easier. Um, and it didn't even take, drawing, right? It didn't even take drawing. You could just kind of snap a picture, and there you go. You get a kind of fully realistic picture of a human. Um, and what we're going to look at first is a fascinating tshuva of the Yaskil of D, um, who is a early 20th century posek from Aleppo and a significant mikubal as well. And he is asked about the halakhic permissibility of photography. Um, and he ends up actually prohibiting it. And so he sort of introduces his answer right by talking about this prohibition of creating the human form, right? Mishum ha'adam hu merkava b'tzura elyona, that um that the right humanity is on some level a vehicle for the tzura ha'elyona, for the kind of the for this higher form. Um, there's another Marder Steins or Shamanu, right? What the two reasons why it's prohibited to make a human form, Chada Mishum Lo Ta'asunoti, right? One is this drasha that we saw in our sugya, and number two, Sheni Dalidei Ze Aluli Ta'chez B'Tocho HaKlipa. Um, וחס ושלום לא יחליפנו ולא ימיר טוב ורע בחס ושלום. Right, that another kind of reason why it would be asur to replicate the human form is because we're aluli ta'chez b'tocha klipa, right? The human form contains within it, right, or is on some level the klipa, this kind of like outer shell of this divine essence, and we might come to lachlif, right, yamir tov berata, to mistake that for the important part, right? We might that, and I think, right, in our contemporary world, and in which kind of material and right, material concerns and aesthetics take up so much space. I think there's what to understand in his concern here. He's giving it more spiritual or almost mystical language, but that we might come to mistake what is on the outside for what is really important, and we might come to put too much stock in aesthetics or in the human's external form or exterior appearance. Uvize muvan, he said, muvanitsly, he says, mashmati bo'omrim b'tam hamachmirim, right? The mishum de al yedei hatzilum nital mimenu tzelem Elohim. That actually maybe taking a photograph or being photographed is on some level taking right, takes away from our tzelem Elohim, right? Um, and I'm gonna skip right, but right, هنا ناخد على يدي زي شورى سيترا آخر al diukano, sorry, that on some level that are over caring too much about our external appearances and external, right, aesthetics is going to allow the sitra achra to kind of take over our relationship with our bodies and with God. אז יהיה השליטה גם על דמות תבניתו העיקרי ועל ידי שמתייחסים בו אז נחסר ממנו השפע הקדוש של צלם אלוהים, right? Um, that the more we care about what is on the outside, the more we will the shefa hakadosh of the Tzelem Elohim, which is, right, his kind of mystical or Kabbalistic language for what's going on here, right, is going to be taken away. That on some level we're going to lose what is actually there of the divine essence inside us if we pay too much attention to what's on the outside. And then, right, because of that, right, למי שכבר נהג איסור בזה מאבותיו ועבוד אבותיו, תוודאי דראוי לאחוז מעשה אבותיו בידיו, right? If you don't already have the practice of doing it, then definitely you should be machmir, and you should not take photographs as the masculinity, right? Right, in לזוז יתד בעל תמות. He wants us to be machmir. He thinks it's a bad idea to be taking pictures. But don't worry, Rav Ovadia Yosef is much more is more mekil here, right? He too is asked about whether it is mutar litztalim, right? Ha'im mutar mitzat halacha litztalim b'shmina photography, right? Can I have someone take a picture of me? Oh, yesh isur mishum shana amar lo ta'aseh lecha pesel v'chol tameh, or is there this concern of the problem of lo ta'asuniti? He Kederko Kodesh Rav Ovadia brings a million proofs and a million earlier authorities, and right, that brings all of the different positions in our sugya, the different, right, the Shulchan Aruch and the Taz, and then eventually I'm skipping to the third paragraph here. Right, he gives a couple of reasons to be makil about photography, even according to those who hold, like the Taz, that two-dimensional images are also a problem. What does he say? He says, Ulam, gam ledata poskim machmirim, right? Even according to the poskim machmirim, like the Taz, the two dimensions is still a problem. Nirad de betzilum shel chatzi guf elyon bilvad yesh lahakel, right? That as long as you're taking a picture not of the person's full body, Right, if you're only taking a picture of the top half of the person's body, then it's definitely fine. Because there's some shitot that as long as you're not doing a whole body, it's fine even right, even in three dimensions. And then eventually he says, right, that עולם באמת נראה שכל זה ממשנת חסדים השרידים אשר השם קורא, אבל מעיקר ההלכה, בעיקר בהלכה כבר פשט המנהג להקל בזה בכל אופן בצילום פוטוגרפי. Right, it seems like the minhag, right, the כבר פשט המנהג להקל, right, that the minhag has become that people are just makil about this. Like people seem to be makil like the Shulchan Aruch, that I guess two dimensions is fine. People are doing it. There's a reasonable position. I mean, not only reasonable, right? The mainstream position of the Shulchan Aruch that people seem to be following. That right, if you're not sure if what then there are tzedadim lakan or lakan, go see what people are doing. Right, that Am Yisrael, there's a basic level of trust that what the minhag has become, if it is a legitimate possibility in halacha, it is something that we are willing to rely on and go by and say that minhag itself has weight. So Rabbi Ovadia is makil on photography. Right, the fact that everyone seems to be taking photographs is proof to him that Am Yisrael is nohig to be makil like the Shulchan Aruch. And, another question that sort of has contemporary relevance, not about photography, but actually about three-dimensional figures, that comes up is a question about dolls, right? Dolls, many people play with dolls, right? American Girl dolls, or right, that was what was common when I was growing up, are very realistic on some level, human likeness. And the question is, right, the Isur of isn't just about making them, but is also about holding on to them, right? An unblemished human form theoretically should be a sort to hold on to. So, can we play with dolls? Can we own dolls? Can we buy them for our kids? So the shoot of the Maharit, right? The Maharit, right, 16th century posek tackles this question. Um, Ella hachi kamar asur la'asot tzura lenoi dehainu davar kavua sheitu lamar sheish b'hamamash. L'fukei derech arai lefi sha'ah. Kigon mesachik b'hem o lehitlamed deshari delo atu lemite. So he draws a distinction here between what he calls a tzura that is davar kavua and a tzura that is derech arai, right? That is something that is permanent um, or yeah, that it's something that's permanent versus something that's awry, impermanent, kind of temporary, not as solid. And he describes right, and he says that the problem with sculpture and the problem with portraiture and all of that is about making things that could potentially people might come to think that they matter, that they have powers, that they have that right, taking a sculpture and putting it in a museum is something that people respect and that people um take time to right and that people um want to give kavod to. But dolls aren't like that, right? Little figurines that you use to play with or to teach something. That's a derech arai according to the Maharit, and therefore it's okay. ולפי דרכנו למדנו באותם פרצופות שעושים לתינוקות לשחק בהם, right? Anything that kids use to play with, that's totally fine. Otam misachkim לשחק בהם הואיל ולאו בדרך קבע אבידה shari, because it's not derech keva. Then it's okay. That's the opinion of Maharit. It is worth noting though that the Shevet HaLevi is actually machmir, and that he thinks that dolls can be problematic, right? He's asked Mishiyesh lo buba b'toch beito im yadayim v'raglayim, if you have a full kind of human body doll, ha'im chayav lepogmo, are you obligated to damage it in some way to take out some kind of right, to take out part of the body part, want some part of the body, such that it would no longer be a complete human form. And his answer, davar pashut etzura shleima panim shalim de'asur lahashot, where you can't have a complete human form, anything in your house, v'tzarich lifgom hapanim kalacha, and then there and you need to mess up its face somehow as per halacha. And there's a question about exactly how to do that, whether you can take out an eye, take out an ear, something, etc. So the Maharit takes the Mekil position here. The Shevet HaLevi takes the Machmir position. So just to zoom out for a second and talk about the different halakhic questions that emerged from the sugya. So number one, is it permissible to create a purely decorative sculpture of a human form? Chad mashma'i, everyone agrees, no. Sculpture, right? You cannot make a sculpture of human form. That's the problem of lo tasuniti, if it's in 3 dimensions. Now, the question in the blue, right? Is it permissible to draw a human for purely decorative purposes? There is machloket between, on the one hand, the Ramban, who says no, not okay, and the um, um, and on the other side, Tosafot and the Rambam, who permit it. And those two sides are eventually taken by the Shulchan Aruch on the side of the Mekilim and the Taz on the side of the Machmirim. Is it possible, question number 3, to photograph a human figure? We saw in the Maskil of D that there are reasons, and he makes an argument that we should forbid it. Rav Ovadia, however, permits it, and most contemporary poskim think that photography is okay. And is it permissible to buy dolls or toys that have human form? According to um, according to the Maharit, it's okay, and according to the Shevet HaLevi, it is not. So I hope that that this sugya kind of brought us into some questions that might come up nowadays, but also I think gave us a window into um, some larger kind of theological or spiritual questions about how we relate to the human form and the human body, what it means to be created in the divine in the image of God, and how that kind of divine essence in us, what that demands of us with regard to how we treat ourselves and how we treat other human beings, and how we think about kind of aesthetics and human form that as it shows up in the world. Thanks so much, and see you next week.